In August 1963, British police arrived at an isolated property in Buckinghamshire called Leatherslade Farm. The criminals who had been using it as a safe house were already gone. They had abandoned the building in a massive, panicked hurry. Inside, detectives found a bizarre scene. Spread across a table was a vintage Monopoly board, but the gang had avoided using the paper currency that came in the box. They had been playing with real, stolen cash. Around the game, the rest of the property was completely uncleaned. Ordinary household items and food were scattered everywhere. An everyday bottle of tomato ketchup sat in the open, heavily covered in fingerprints. The state of the farm illustrated a reality of criminal investigations. The police do not have to witness the crime. They simply have to wait for the perpetrators to leave behind a mundane, careless detail that connects their faces to the scene. The mess at the farmhouse contrasted with the gang's performance just hours earlier. In the middle of the night, they had successfully ambushed and completely hijacked the speeding Royal Mail train. They stripped the train of 120 mailbags. The haul contained £2.6 million in cash, a fortune equating to tens of millions of pounds in the modern economy. It remains one of the most meticulously planned logistical operations in British history. Yet the men capable of engineering a precise train robbery collapsed when it came to the discipline of cleaning up a hideout. To successfully stop a moving train, the gang required specific intelligence, the exact transport schedules, cargo weights, and the internal security of the carriage. This image shows a red Royal Mail traveling post office carriage. The criminals knew that after a Scottish bank holiday, this specific unit, the high-value package carriage, would carry an extraordinary accumulation of cash. They received the exact date and location from an unidentified insider known only as the Ulsterman. The target was heavily loaded, moving at speed and passing through an isolated stretch of countryside. The thieves had to devise a way to make the driver halt the locomotive willingly, in a location remote enough to avoid detection, but accessible enough for heavy extraction vehicles. This raw data turned a conceptual impossibility into a realistic, actionable plan. The information provided by their insider allowed them to move beyond brute force and toward a sophisticated ambush. At 3 a.m. on August 8th, the ambush began. The gang covered a green railway signal light with a glove and used a basic battery to power the red light. Seeing the red signal, the driver, Jack Mills, brought the locomotive to a halt. When the crew stepped out to investigate, they were quickly overwhelmed. Mills suffered a severe head injury from the attackers. But the criminals immediately faced a problem. The man they had brought along to drive the hijacked train panicked and couldn't operate the controls. The gang forced the bleeding Jack Mills back into the cab, ordering him to move the train further down the line to a designated extraction point. This aerial surveillance map details the geography of the ambush. Looking at the track layout from the false signal up to the bridge, the spatial isolation of this stretch was critical. Once they reached Bridego Bridge, the extraction phase began. The gang formed a human chain, moving 120 mailbags out of the carriage, weighing a combined 2.5 tons, and into their waiting vehicles. It gave them exactly 30 minutes before authorities could raise the alarm. Within that half-hour window, the gang loaded millions of pounds and disappeared into the night. They had successfully executed the most lucrative ambush in British history. The immediate post-heist logic was to drive a short distance to Leatherslade Farm and wait for the initial police dragnet to sweep past them before distributing the cash. But they miscalculated the state's response. The scale of the theft triggered a nationwide emergency. The entire British police network mobilized investigators, resources, and patrols far faster than the gang anticipated. Hearing the intense manhunt closing in on radio broadcasts, the gang panicked. They fled Leatherslade Farm prematurely, failing to complete their intended cleanup of the site. When Scotland Yard's flying squad arrived at the abandoned property, they found a forensic archive. Detectives lifted fingerprints from the furniture, the bottles, and the Monopoly board, connecting the evidence directly to known underworld figures. The robbery unraveled within days. The gang had spent months planning how to manipulate a railway system, but they lacked the internal discipline to manage the pressure of the aftermath. The justice system responded mercilessly. In an attempt to prevent the robbery from becoming a guide for future criminals, judges handed down severe 30-year prison sentences to several members of the gang. But the public reacted differently. Captivated by the scale of the money and the audacity of the midnight ambush, British culture began to romanticize the thieves, turning them into cinematic anti-heroes. The state attempted to bury the perpetrators to deter future crimes. Instead, the spectacle of the trial and the severity of the sentences cemented their status as cultural legends. This aerial view shows the scale of Wandsworth Prison. 15 months into his 30-year sentence, Ronnie Biggs managed to climb over the wall and escape. Biggs eventually reached Brazil. Protected by extradition loopholes, he lived freely in the sun for decades, taunting British authorities and transforming into an international celebrity. Other members faced a quieter reality. Buster Upwards eventually returned to Britain. After his release, he lived out his remaining years running a flower stall outside Waterloo Station. Whether they lived in South American exile or sold flowers in the London rain, the perpetrators became prisoners of their notoriety. Their identities were consumed by what they did in a 30-minute window in 1963. Despite the convictions, the case left behind unresolved questions. The vast majority of the £2.6 million was never recovered, quietly vanishing into the criminal underworld. And despite decades of ongoing investigations, police never conclusively proved the identity of the mastermind. The insider, the Ulsterman, who supplied the crucial carriage data, walked away clean. Today, with modern surveillance, digital currency, and advanced communication, a crime of this nature is functionally impossible to replicate. The gang successfully stole millions, but by leaving their identities on a simple board game, they traded freedom to become permanent ghosts in history.